Well, hello again. We're back from our break and I'm eager to start what will be a fascinating discussion hosted by New South Wales Circular's Industry Task Force Chair, Joyanne Manning, Principal at Arup, on industry levers for a circular economy, taxation and policy. And on World Water Day, we're also joined by recycled water disruptor Hydroloop from the Netherlands. So an exciting lineup. Joyanne, over to you.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Welcome everyone, and I'm sure you've had a fantastic morning, and this is the last session of the end of two great days. I'm delighted to be representing the Industry Task Force and the greater industry, who are obviously the key enabler to a circular economy. And I'm particularly excited to be able to introduce the rapid review findings that the Industry Task Force sponsored, and it's all around the opportunity to use fiscal measures and taxation to really promote a circular economy. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over through to the UTS team, and it was headed by Natalie Stoyanov. Sorry, apology, Natalie, with my bad Irish accent pronouncing your name. So Natalie is the Professor and Director of Intellectual Property Programme at the Faculty of Law at the University of Technology, Sydney, and she is going to present to us today on the rapid review findings.
Hi, Joyanne. Thank you. It's actually Monique that will be presenting today.
Oh, sorry, Monique.
Natalie will be joining us. Can I just check that you can see the right screen?
Yeah, I can see it. Hopefully other people can see it as well.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you. So you're seeing the main slide?
It's in presenter mode still.
Right. Oh, okay. So I'll swap displays.
Yeah.
That.
Perfect.
Thank you. Cheers. Okay, thank you, Joyanne. So my name's
Monique. Just Monique, we're still seeing you in presenter mode. You just want to maybe go to whole screen. We're still seeing your notes and.
Okay, thank you.
Oh. If you
Is that
just
better?
go, you just should be able to get it up the top of your screen. You should just be able to swatch. Yeah, you got it now. Perfect.
Got it? Okay, perfect.
Yay.
Thank you. Cheers. Okay, so I'm Monique Retmal, and I'm a research director at the Institute for Sustainable Futures at UTS. Natalie Stoyanov is also one of our team members. And so we're going to present today some of the findings from our rapid review on taxation and fiscal policy for a circular economy. Okay. So this project was very much a collaboration between myself and Professor Natalie Stoyanov at UTS, as well as Dr. Stephen Liaros at University of Sydney and Professor Bin Tran Nam at University of New South Wales. Nick Edwards was also assisting at UTS. Okay, so our study, the objectives were to review the literature regarding taxation and fiscal policy for a circular economy and to discuss their applicability in the Australian context and specifically in New South Wales. So in so doing, we were aiming to identify international best practice and also to develop some case studies. So the scope of our study was focused on New South Wales. We looked at Commonwealth levels and also at local government as well. We focused primarily on taxation with some consideration of procurement in New South Wales. And in terms of geography, the studies that we found were primarily from Europe and Asia. Okay, I'm now going to hand over to Stephen Liaros to quickly do some context setting around the circular economy.
Yes, thanks, Monique. So it's important to look at the various perspectives of a circular economy, how it's interpreted, and to, of course, harmonise the policies at different levels at the micro, meso and macro level. And this draws out some policy tensions that we've identified. And so, of course, the micro level is where we tend to talk about waste streams, which can be expanded to think about resource and material flows through the economy, which is the main area in which we think about circular economy. But at the meso level, it's the infrastructure and assets and buildings that facilitate the flow of that economic activity. So those policies need to be harmonised. And so the question becomes, are we looking at policy adjustments or an entirely new tax architecture? If we're focused solely on recycling, do we tend to ignore the idea of reducing demand, and particularly in an economy that's focused on continual increasing consumption, how do we reconcile that with demand management? And so also in terms of taxation policy, a lot of that is focused on taxing the flow of economic activity. How do we shift that potentially to taxing wealth and assets and land instead of those flows? Over to you, Monique.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay, so I'm going to give some highlights from our international literature review. There's more that will be available in our report, but we'll spend a bit more time on the recommendations. Okay, so in reviewing the literature, we found that a best practice approach to fiscal policy for a circular economy would involve fundamental change to the structure of the tax system. So one of the key ideas is to shift taxation away from income and labour and towards resources and consumption. So, for example, this would mean reducing income tax and increasing GST and taxes on resources. It could also mean shifting taxation away from renewable resources and towards non-renewable resource use. So, for example, creating incentives for renewables and removing subsidies for fossil fuels, for example. So an important consideration with this sort of fundamental shift is that as taxation moves away from income and labour and towards resources and consumption, government revenue will decline over time because the flow of resources will slow down. So this means that taxation would need to shift towards a more stable tax base, as Stephen has already flagged, such as taxing wealth, land and assets, or their usage. So, for example, this could mean an increase in property taxes gradually over time. Okay, so these are the big ideas that are out there in the literature. Okay, so in terms of shifting taxation towards consumption, an example of this would be increasing GST. There's also opportunities to reduce GST to apply them to particular circular activities. So, for example, we could provide tax breaks for encouraging repair rather than replacement, or to drive a preference for reuse or reused or recycled materials. However, such kind of differential changes in GST would need to be harmonised across jurisdictions to prevent industry from hopping around, of course. And thinking about driving specific behaviours or practices around the circular economy, what we found in the evidence in the literature is that driving specific circular economy practices are likely to require a variety of policy instruments. So, for example, in Sweden, there were tax breaks offered for repair activities. However, they were found to be insufficient and not effective across all sectors. So other policy measures have been recommended to drive repair. So, for example, such as awareness raising, regulation, product guarantees, greater labelling and information. So fiscal policy is likely to need a package of mutually reinforcing policies. Okay, so our study also looked at tax expenditures to incentivise circular business activities. So, and this was looking at ideas from the literature as well as the sort of tax incentives currently offered in Australia. So there are R&D tax concessions currently available in Australia, but they are only available to large enterprises and they are quite difficult to access. And so an opportunity could be to make such tax concessions available to a wider range of enterprises, including SMEs and also startups. We also looked at other ideas such as tax holidays and expanding patent box tax incentives. These could be considered to encourage circular technology investment. In the literature, we found that waste levies are a foundational fiscal policy. They are in use all over the world, including in Australia. And one interesting idea that we found was that there is potential to implement a progressive levy associated with the waste hierarchy. So, for example, that would mean that the highest taxes at end of life are associated with landfill and incineration. And then that would gradually reduce up the hierarchy. And so that at the upper end of the waste hierarchy, where we have waste avoidance and reuse, there would be no taxation associated with those activities. So just to highlight that there aren't a lot of studies evaluating or looking at the effectiveness of these fiscal policies, but there are experiments underway, and further study would be required to consider all of the usual things such as effectiveness and equity and neutrality and so on. Okay, so I'm going to move on to our recommendations now. So just in terms of the high-level fiscal approach, as we've already mentioned, to achieve a fully circular economy, we need a paradigm shift, and there therefore would need to be fundamental change in the architecture of the tax system. That best practice approach includes that shifting away from taxes on labour, so reducing taxes on labour and increasing taxes on consumption and on non-renewable resources, as well as gradually increasing taxes on existing assets, land and wealth. So these are kind of the headline ideas. And then there are opportunities to target the circular economy at 3 different scales. So name the product level, precinct or neighbourhood level, and at the state and national level. We think that fiscal policy reforms should consider the opportunities to drive all 3 to have that systemic approach. I'm now going to hand over to Natalie to share the recommendations around the Australian context.
Thanks very much, Monique. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, good. Okay, so from the Australian context, we've got to be aware that at the Commonwealth level, reforms to the GST and resources tax have significant potential to drive change. Of course, what we have to keep aware of, though, is that GST is a regressive tax, and so we have to be aware of not impacting the lower income members of our society as well. So that has to be taken into consideration. At the state level, then of course that needs to be in conjunction with major tax reform, because there are various opportunities that we have, not on the income level, but certainly on the payroll tax level, and the land taxes and mining royalties, etc. There are opportunities there to manipulate those to enable a more circular economy. And for example, we also consider the idea of transport-related levies, which are fairly well known in many other nations as well, where you try to encourage public transport instead of the use of the private car, and that can be achieved through, congestion taxes and those sorts of things. Then at the local government level, of course, we need to think about strategic town planning, and that includes things such as land use and infrastructure planning to enable the actual delivery of circular economy precincts, for example. And this could be harmonised, of course, with local council costs, the income from rates, etc., and other fees and charges, which we already know about. And then fiscal policies, of course, will need to be accompanied by other instruments so as to make sure that the whole package makes sense. So you need to actually encourage fiscal policy to work with environmental regulations, etc., to mutually reinforce each other. Are you able to? Thank you. And then further, of course, we've already heard about the waste levies. They will remain a cornerstone together with any variations, because that's very important to keep that in mind, as that is a key element of the circular economy. Also, the existing subsidies and tax concessions that are what we call perverse concessions that assist in the pollution aspect and in fact deal with the linear industries and more wasteful consumption practices need to be identified and removed. and things such as the fossil fuel subsidy should be removed from that point of view, but keeping in mind again the impacts that might have in certain stratas of our society. So we need to be able to balance them quite well. And that also goes for small business taxation concessions, again, needing to restructure them so that whilst there are concessions that encourage wastefulness, we can restructure those, but at the same time not impact too greatly the small business sector, which is the majority of the Australian economy at this point in time and has been for a very long time. Incentives, of course, to drive the uptake of the circular economy is not an unusual concept. I mean, it would be providing incentives to actually take up certain activities to encourage repair, to encourage reuse of machinery, etc., and waste. And then finally there, which we haven't spent too much time on, but is an important element, of course, is the issue of sustainable procurement requirements, so that at each level of government we have guidelines in place to assist in decision-making by the government when it comes to procurement issues. So that needs to be significantly strengthened.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Monique, Natalie and Stephen. And we're starting to get questions in, but I think I'm going to hold them over to the panel, because Alexander's question particularly is, I think, will be something that's will be very relevant for you guys to answer, but I'd be very keen to hear what the other panelists have got to say. We talk about the need for harmonisation, but then Natalie, and Monique and Stephen, you've talked very clearly about the differential taxation system and the challenges with regard to that. The one thing that comes to me is that we know we need this paradigm shift, but then Monique, you talk quite passionately about the fact that we need to balance it and be very mindful that we don't impact those who are least able to deal with it. So how do we accelerate while also having a sort of the least sort of detrimental impact on society? So maybe you might have a think about what we can do, and maybe what are our lowest hanging fruits and what way we can move forward. So thank you all very much, and if everyone can get together some questions, that would be really good, and we look forward to hearing from you in a little while. So Lachlan, I see you are online. Lachlan is going to speak to us next from Brambles, and Lachlan is the Sustainability Asia Pacific Senior Manager at Brambles, and I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyanne, and I'm just going to bring up my screen. Let me know when you can see that, and hopefully it doesn't turn out in presenter mode.
Oh, no, you're perfect. Thank you.
Amazing. Hi, I'm Lachlan Feggins, Director of Sustainability for Brambles and SHEP across Asia Pacific and the corporate function. Great to join you today at the tail end of what's been quite a series of fantastic discussions. I'm joining you from Gundungurra country, the traditional lands of the Gundungurra people down in the New South Wales Southern Highlands. I want to pay my respects to their elders past and present, and the emerging leaders as well. And also acknowledge the fact that in terms of circular economy, that's where it really, that's the most effective circular economy that society has ever seen. Can we get back to that? That's the challenge. So what I'm going to share with you today is what I hope is a really practical example of a circular system in effect. We've spoken a lot yesterday and today about conceptual, arguments around what the circular economy is and why we should have it, and how we should bring it into play. What I hope to share is this is something that's already happening. It's happening at scale, and also consider Brambles as a template. Not Brambles is a circular business, that's fantastic. More so, how can the principles that Brambles, the business model that Brambles has in place, how can that be adopted for other industries and sectors, whether they're transitioning to a circular economy or whether they're a startup and then they're thinking, let's just start circular as opposed to being the sort of incumbent that has to change. Okay. So look, in terms of our 2025 sustainability framework, it's important to set the context here. What we're aiming to do is to pioneer regenerative supply chain. So it's a big picture stuff. And reuse and resilience and regeneration are going to be the core tenets that are going to drive that pathway. So from a, reuse is fundamental to our business model, and that's essentially where our circularity comes from. And what we tend to refer to our business as a share and reuse business, where our customers are sharing and reusing resources to perform a task, to get a job done, essentially. And I'll expand on that a little bit further down. Resilience, look, anyone in the supply chain space has had to be super resilient the last couple of years, as you can imagine. And we've proven to be. It's been hard, it's been challenging. We've certainly had our challenges as a circular business, but we've been resilient and been able to deliver value to customers and our shareholders throughout that process. The final piece is regeneration, and that's really where we're all aiming to get to, where we're actually, rather than being a business that consumes resources and produces waste, we want to be a business that actually consumes waste and produces resources, and that's essentially what Brambles' vision is aiming to do. Very quickly, some of our 2025 targets. So this is reasonably short term, as you can imagine. We have a vision that goes, the regenerative vision goes well beyond 2025. I do want to call out a couple of things here, and these are very highly summarized, as you can see. But we've got some targets around waste positive, and that's essentially where we're looking to actually step outside our business boundary and address circular challenges that our customers have and generally society and community has, and actually bring in waste, low value waste plastics, for example, and put them in our products. And once they're in our products, they're circular for good. And that's just part of our business model. We've had some really good early success with that as well. The supply chain positive piece, and that's something I'm going to talk about the next couple of slides. That's essentially helping making our customer supply chains more circular and more sustainable. And we use life cycle assessment to really drive that one. And I know life cycle assessment's been referred to a lot through the presentations, as it should be. And what we'll show you is how we use it to engage our customers and also our shareholders and our people in saying, this is why we're circular and sustainable versus the alternative linear make waste options that are available for people in the packaging space. A couple of other things I'll just quickly mention: food security and circular transformation. There's some other targets we've got here. Food security really is about giving food banks, food rescue organisations the platforms, be they pallets, crates, containers, to help them operate. So we're essentially the logistics backbone for the food rescue organisations, not just here in Australia, but right around the world. And of course, that's an organisation or group of organisations been incredibly stressed and stretched over the last couple of years. And we play a fundamental role in helping their supply chain work effectively by giving them the platforms at no cost. Circular transformation, that's essentially where we're trying to share with our stakeholders, like we are today, what our business model is, why it's circular, why we'd like to see more businesses in more sectors transition to circular models. So we want to actually influence change makers, and hopefully today we get a few of those. Very quickly, we have some recognitions. I'm not going to harp on these, but more and more circular businesses are getting recognised for their circularity and for their role in being a low carbon, inherently low carbon business, and also their role in addressing climate. Okay, the big picture stuff that we're all pointing towards. So we've got a few recognitions here. I'm just going to call out the Ellen MacArthur Foundation one, because that was mentioned in one of the previous sessions. So we've been a partner of Ellen MacArthur Foundation since 2015, and we've gone through the Circulytics program, and we get an A. We score right up the top there because our business model is circular, and that's a really objective way of analysing a circular system in effect. And then myself and my team actually produced the results for that. So it's really good to see that we're up the top there, and we'd love to see more companies sign up and participate in that one as well. But I also appreciate time is of the essence, and I'll keep moving. What do we do at Brambles? Well, essentially, this is it on screen. It's pallets, crates, containers, and that's pretty boring. I can understand that, but it's what we do with these that makes us sustainable. So all the platforms you see here help goods move through the supply chain. And again, we've been very challenged to do that in the last couple of years, but they've still been doing that. The thing that brings the commonality between these products is they're reusable. They're durable, they're repairable, and every time one of these is used, it eliminates a single-use linear alternative. And that's why we're a circular business, and that's really, really fundamental. Coming back to one of the targets I mentioned, I think it's worth bringing this up now, is the recycled content in our products. And we're looking to try and put more recycled content in these, especially our plastic products. The key thing here is we still need to stay true to our circular fundamentals. Whereas the recycled content cannot actually undermine the performance of the circular product, as in reduce its strength, reduce its durability, reduce its circularity. So these are the things that you need to consider when you're actually looking to move into the circular space, that we know one of the challenges that we're grappling with right now. Life cycle assessment. Look, we use this all the time. It really is the basis of our circular story. And whenever we do the comparison, and we always use independent peer-reviewed LCAs right around the world to prove that, you know, the circular system is far more environmentally beneficial than a linear system as well. So that's something that we've used for well before I was at Brambles, and I've been around for 7 years. And that's something that I think objectively helps, you know, customers and shareholders understand why there's a difference between, you know, linear versus circular. And again, it's a key metric for us. Every year we aggregate all our LCA numbers up to a global level, and this is a key, you know, communication we give to our stakeholders, you know, and you can start to see the quantities of environmental benefits associated with a global, you know, a business that's globally doing circularity at scale. So really fantastic. And I think that the more that we can start to use LCA in other sectors and in other environments, the better. Key to LCA though is engaging your stakeholders, and specifically customers. And one of the things we do here is we actually can tailor these LCAs to the customer supply chain. So the amount of times they've used one of our platforms, be it a pallet, a crate, or container, we can actually use the LCA to say, look, these are your indicative savings in terms of carbon, water, and waste saved from using a circular system over a single linear system. And it's incredibly engaging, and customers love this. Shareholders love this because it helps them fundamentally understand what we're actually doing and why we consider ourselves sustainable. And I think that's going to be something, communicating circularity and communicating the benefits of that as something you've really got to put a lot of energy into, because people still have circularity as a conceptual thing that happens somewhere else. Everyone talks about it, but nobody's actually doing it. So this really makes it practical and tangible. So look, I'm going to take a step forward here very quickly in the last couple of slides. We're like many businesses at the moment, we're undergoing a transformation. We're a big circular business. We've been doing the same thing for a very long time, but we need to disrupt ourselves. And one of the ways we're doing that is we've got a very comprehensive transformation program where essentially what we're aiming to do is to improve our core circular business model while building the supply chain of the future. And a lot of that forward-looking piece is actually leveraging data and digital to really help us do that. And one example I'm going to pull out that's going to be practical for all of you on the call is something we've done with our pallets. So we've essentially serialized a lot of our assets in some of the regions in which we operate. And what that helps us do is it helps track our assets. And if you're a circular business, fundamentally, you've got to get your asset back. Otherwise, you're not circular. And so what we've been able to do with different technologies is actually track and map where our pallets are, how they behave, how customers interact with them, where we can reduce losses, reduce theft, reduce misuse, and also understand how supply chains operate and use that information to improve the supply chain as a whole. And this is really a work in progress at the moment. We're going to be expanding this digital application of technology to our assets so we can understand our supply chains a lot better and be more circular as well. So I'll leave it at that because I know that time is of the essence and we want to give time for the other speakers, but there's a lot more of content on this on our website, and I'm happy to engage offline and of course answer questions afterwards. But I'll leave it at that, Joanne, and hand it back.
Lachlan, fantastic. And we've been getting lots of questions through, and I think you're going to be busy when come the panel asking these questions. But look, fantastic example by Brambles. It's just an exemplar company. and, very much walking the talk, but also clearly demonstrating. And what I really like is providing clear evidence-based metrics to, why you are being successful, but also pushing your own boundaries, particularly around digital and data, which is really exciting. So look forward to deep diving into some of that with you further in a few minutes. Just as a quick note, if people can, if they have a specific question to ask the panelists, could you please just use the Q&A function below rather than the chat function? It just means it's just going to be easier to make sure that we get your questions addressed rather than having to go between one or the other, because I think people are using both at the moment. So finally, this morning, we are delighted, and thank you, Sabine. It's very late in the Netherlands and you are very, very good to stay up so late to join us to talk about Hydroloop and the Hydroloop Systems. Sabine Severe is the CMO and the co-founder of Hydroloop Systems, a global leader in designing and producing innovative and game-changing decentralized water recycling products. And I'm going to hand over to Sabine now without further ado, so we have plenty of time to hear her and then have plenty of time for Q&A. Okay, thanks to you, Sabine.
Thank you so much, and good morning. Can I just check you can see my presentation and can hear me?
We can't see your presentation yet. We are just looking at your background slide at the moment, unless that is your first slide.
That is my first slide.
Oh, perfect. Then we can see you perfectly. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I'm very honored to be here. So thank you very much for having me. And basically, I'll tell you all about our vision, our mission, show you our circular solution for an increasing global water crisis, and that on World Water Day. And obviously a beautiful case study here in Australia. So Hydroloop, the company that I'm the CMO of, actually started in 2015 as a small startup, a husband and wife in a garage store, I always call it. But we've actually grown into an internationally recognized multi-award winning venture. We empower people and organizations bottom up with our smart and innovative water recycling products. So with our products, you can actually save water and wastewater, reduce your carbon footprint, and keep full comfort of living with low maintenance products. So let me talk to you about our extreme decentral water recycling, and let me talk about why we should recycle, and some background on the company, our products, and of course, our case study in Australia. So we all need water and can't live without, but it looks like we've all been in the carbon vision tunnel. Water seems to have been lacking in the discussion. But by 2050, we will have 2 billion people more on the planet, and 60% of us will be living in urban environments, and we will need 55% more water than we are using right now. So we are facing a massive challenge. And obviously we also have climate change, pollution, sinking groundwater levels, which are all aggravating the challenge. But we've created a vision and a solution and a mission. And basically the mission is to act wise and use water twice, very simple. And the vision is also very easy, actually, that every house and every building anywhere on Earth has its own water source. And this is actually the lightly contaminated grey water. So think of bath, shower, washing machine, but it can also be the condensation water from air conditioners and heat pumps. And by collecting this water on the spot in the building, treating it and making it clean, clear and safe, you can actually reuse this water again for purposes that do not need tap water supply, like toilet flushing, washing machine, garden irrigation, or swimming pool top-up. Now, this is not just our vision. It's actually substantiated by the United Nations, for example, who stated in their report last year at World Water Day that, the 3 R's, we must reduce, recycle, and reuse our water. But it's also substantiated by a lot of scientific research, and it's all pointing into the same direction, that if we want to create resilient urban water systems, we should recycle to attain water security. Water infrastructure resilience through decentralization means actually flexibility at the city level and redundancy in commercial settings. So we created the Hydroloop as a real consumer product. It's compact, user-friendly, it's fit and forget. The water is always safe. The system has very low maintenance. It's self-cleaning, internet connected for remote monitoring and over-the-air software updates and app support. And the app actually creates customer awareness of the water recycled, how much is saved, and how you can optimize to use this actual water. We started with the Hydroloop 300, a 300-liter unit, which you're seeing here on the left. But in the meantime, we've actually, I'm just wondering if you are seeing this one over there. So I'm just moving it up here, sorry. So we've actually created several products. So the 300 is for smaller families. We have the 600 for larger families. And actually coming out soon is actually the Hydroloop Conceal, which is a multi-family housing an apartment solution, and it has very easy plumbing. So this is also very, very easy for retrofit situations because our other products are standalone and are more fit for new construction. So this is for real estate, residential real estate, but we also have solutions, and let me just, go here. But we also have solutions for commercial real estate. So this is a modular and scalable and made-to-measure solutions. And actually, right now, we are doing a lot of projects on this. Student housing, lodges, and sports clubs. And actually, we're seeing a major trend in the world, everywhere in the world, where you're seeing that the hospitality branch and the sports sector, they are all making their buildings more sustainable. And this is all driven by, and this is very important, obviously, the global goals and also initiatives like the European Green Deal, to name a few. Now, how the Hydroloop works is very easy, actually. It collects the lightly contaminated water, either through gravity or through a sanitary lift pump. It cleans it, and thereafter, it can be reused again for purposes that do not need tap water, like the toilet flushing, washing machine, etc. And we have created a unique treatment. This is why we've also been winning a lot of awards, which is completely biological. So we don't use any chemicals, we don't use any filters or membranes, and that is very, very important because these always clog and need a lot of maintenance. And we wanted to create this consumer product that is easy for people to use. So it's this six techniques, and anybody wanting to know more about it, I'll go deep dive into them, but I'll leave it for that at the moment. But of course, it's very important. So what the water and the water quality. So this is a visual, and on the left, you see how the water goes in, and on the right, how the water comes out. We're certified for the US and European standards. And this is, and I'll come back to it later, this is a very important issue. In Australia, there is actually a New South Wales Health Advisory Note created that now ensures the Hydroloop water recycling units can also be safely installed and used in New South Wales, which wasn't before that. Competitive position. If we're looking at alternative solutions for water supply and water savings, obviously we need all of these solutions. So it's not, we are not the be all of end all. But if we look, for example, at desalination, this comes at a very, very high cost. It's actually costing 4 times as much as dam water, for example. And this would obviously drive up the water prices tremendously. And it also comes at a very high energy cost. If you're looking at rainwater harvesting, well, Sydney has had a lot of rainwater recently, of course, but it's either too much or too little. And the interesting thing about grey water recycling is that you always have a supply, because you always have a supply of grey water, and so you always every day creating new recycled water that you can use. This is to show you some of our happy customers. So residential, we have customers in Europe, America, Africa, Southeast Asia, and commercial real estate. We're looking at, for example, luxury lodges in Namibia. We're doing the Hyatt Hotel right now in Belgium. And we are also sustaining a lot of soccer clubs. And here's one of them in the Netherlands. This is just an overview of the company, how it started. On the left, the inventor of the Hydroloop, which is also my husband, Arthur Valkieser, in the garage. This is how it all started. I wasn't that interested at the time, but slowly it became also an interesting, well, one of my babies. And basically, you know, over the years, you can see we've developed a lot. We came to market in 2017. I think 2020 was the most important moment in our lives because we were in Las Vegas at the Consumer Electronics Show, and there Hydraloop won the best of the best, meaning the best product of 20,000 products, beating Samsung's foldable tablet, beating BMW's e-car. The Decentral Water Recycler won the biggest product, and this shot us to fame all over the world. And this has leveraged our visibility tremendously, which is obviously, as a startup company, is what you need. Since then, you know, we've been expanding the company in staff and production, etc. We've been raising some funds, and we recently had a very, very good fundraising, raising 4.5 million. So therefore, we can really scale up production and scale up our company. And already we have 120 partners worldwide, and we have companies or offices in the Netherlands. We all have offices in the US and in the Middle East. And, you know, we are now in the process of selling thousands of units and expecting to be selling tens of thousands of units in the coming years. To give it a face, this is the team, or actually, I must say, this was the team, because the last month we hired 6 more staff. So, but this is just to give you a face of the mission-driven team that we have at the company. And also, if you want to see more of us, we have a Hydraloop YouTube channel, and there is, I'm very proud to say that there's a lot showing on the Hydraloop YouTube channel. But to name a few, I'm very, very excited that we're in Netflix documentary Brave Blue World, which is showing all these solutions for a more sustainable planet. And I was very proud also to be addressing world leaders at COP26 last November in Glasgow. Our market strategy is focused on the low-hanging fruit, which is the new construction, new build, because we need to build, water recycle, and future-proof. And this needs to be by design. So water reuse needs, you know, different piping a little bit. And so that's why we are focusing on new construction for now. But the retrofit market will follow, because it's only a matter of time. And all buildings in the next coming 10, 20 to 30 years will all be, you know, changed and made more and more sustainable. Now, as you see, we have a global market, but now let's zoom into Australia. Let's zoom into Sydney. And, you know, basically Sydney, water storages are shrinking fast. Moody's has warned that the water stress will be the biggest threat facing Sydney by 2030. And this is most importantly because of the city's population growth. So this has nothing to do with reduced rainfall or increased climate change. So I'm very, very excited and very happy that we have a partnership with Sydney Water. And, you know, for a circular transition to be successful, you need top-down and bottom-up collaboration. And this is really what we are seeing here. Basically, Sydney Water, and it was even on 7 News exclusive, 24th of January in Australia, introducing Hydraloop to the Australian residential market. There are more than 30 units out there right now. And Sydney Water is enabling a pilot with homes with all kinds of different setups. So existing homes, and we're doing new homes, and also setting up a Hydraloop cascade for, like, I think it's going to be a gym or something like that for a commercial installation. And obviously with this trial, Sydney Water wants to learn what is the ease of installation, what are the benefits, what are the customer experiences, and of course to do the research on water saving performance and energy use. The beauty of this situation is, or this collaboration, and this is what we need in general, is that what happened is that the Building Sustainability Index was changed last year. So now all new homes designed and built need to achieve 40% water use reduction. This is what we need if we want to make the change to a more circular economy and world. And thereafter, we had an issue because the Australian standard for grey water recycling was not fit for our products. But Sydney Water and New South Wales Health collaborated, and they have ensured that now our product is designated as a grey water processing unit. And it is not regulated by New South Wales Health, but by the local government and the council. Now, herewith again, Sydney Water will assist homeowners at their local councils with regard to development applications, and will also look at several options of how to help finance water recycling units. Now, my question, and I think that will be very interesting to look at it. So what would be the best? Would we subsidize water usage, or will we subsidize water savings? And what about water as a service, whereby, for example, water recycling units are installed in homes and water is metered, city water is metered and grey water is metered at a different price. These are all interesting ways for business cases. I already said for a circular transition to be successful, you need top-down and bottom-up action. So we need public actors, private actors, knowledge institutes, consumer involvement, all working together. And I know that is what we have found here in Sydney. I'm very, very proud. I really want to say this of Sydney Water's leadership, because they are the first water utility in the world that do not look at us, water recycling, as a threat, but as a means of a new business case, and to make sure that they'll be able to supply water for its 8 million inhabitants by 2050. And I hope that this presentation will be an example to show that we are doing well by doing good, and that by being successful, by being meaningful, and also creating ecological and social value. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Sabine. Absolutely inspirational. I think any entrepreneurs or anyone starting out on their journey out will look to your story and be just blown away about, you know, what you have done. I wrote a note very beginning, is like, how have you gone in 7 short years, including 2 years in COVID, to have the impact and scale that you have? And it's and even when you look back at it, it sounds like it's even in some ways even shorter from your time in Vegas to now. So congratulations. An amazing presentation on World Water Day, and I think everyone will agree that we're absolutely privileged to have you speak to us today. And I personally look forward to the opportunity to further looking at how I make my own home more sustainable with something like a Hydroloop, as well as a battery and solar power and other things. So it just demonstrates that it's got many elements to it, and we need to be looking at this across the whole spectrum, across the whole system. Okay, so I think now what we're going to do is move into our panel session, and someone has complimented you in Dutch, and I'm not going to try and even attempt to read that out. So thank you, Carl. I can do the danke. And I look forward to bringing everyone back on. So Lachlan, Monique, Natalie, Stephen, and Sabine. So look, we've had a broad-reaching conversation today, and I think something, you know, from an industry point of view, obviously key to industry is, you know, sort of the environment that we work in, and you know, sort of the taxation system and the architecture, you know, that supports that. And maybe starting, you know, I think it's relevant to all three, is that, you know, as a question I started on earlier with you, Natalie, and Monique and Stephen, but, you know, you talk about the fact that we do need a paradigm shift in order, you know, to truly become to have a truly circular economy. We're not talking about kinking the linear. We want to actually transform to a circular model. But how do we do that in a fair and equitable way, and ensuring that we don't impact those least able to cope with the, you know, potential impacts with regard to that, and that we can drive meaningful change in hopefully as quick as possible? And what do you think is a reasonable time frame that we should be looking to make these substantive changes? No, big question. Who would like to start? Stephen, you look like you want to speak. You want to come off mute?
I was going to suggest Stephen. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, obviously it is a big question, and I think the issue of a circular economy transition, I think you really need to start with what is a circular economy, and really get away from the idea of recycling, and think much more holistically about the built environment, about settlement patterns. So how far do things travel when we're circulating them through the economy? So if we're mining in Australia, producing in China, and then selling it back in Australia, and then shipping it, or, you know, to some sort of, it's that distance that the scale of that economic activity that is part of the problem that we're really not addressing, that we need to think in terms of the spatial circulation of resources, and And that implies that we need to localize much more, that we need to think in terms of circulating water locally, for example, food production in particular, the huge supply chains in relation to food. Food and water are basically required everywhere, so they should be produced everywhere rather than being shipped around the world. And so that reuse of water and circulating the organic material creates that foundation for people. And so we're promoting this idea of a circular economy village as a way of building your energy system, your water system, and your regenerative food system within and around the built environment as a foundation for the economic system. So you then engage in other activities, more complex technological activities from that solid foundation of having a place to live where you have your food and your water and energy provided within that environment. And so, you know, if we keep tinkering around the edges around waste management, then the time to transition will be much longer. If we rethink the entire operating system, how we live on the land and how we work in an economic system, then we can make a much more rapid transition. We can start building what we're describing as a network of circular economy villages, and you can start building them now and put at each moment 200 people within a circular economy, and then build another one and another one. And so the transition could happen much faster if we think much more holistically in that sense.
Yeah, and Sabine, it seems to me that that was a fundamental vision of the Hydraloop, was to localize, you know, essentially that water cycle within, you know, actually locally at a residential or, you know, as you said, on a modular basis within, you know, within the asset. Was that, you know, when your husband, you know, had invented it in his garden shed, was that kind of was that one of his thinking drivers?
Yes, absolutely. I'm just having a technical problem here, so give me a maybe you continue the conversation.
Okay. I might go.
I'll be back in a tick. 1 moment.
No problem at all. Sorry. I'm interested in your, so you're now tracking where your packaging and where your pallets and crates and your containers are going, and you know, how far have you had sight about how far do they travel, how far are they going, how are they, you know, you talk about, you know, sort of, you know, damage to them and losses within the system, but you know, I think it was quite interesting when was it the War on Waste or one of the programs, they put trackers on the soft plastics, and you know, they ended up in far-flung parts of the world. So are you finding, you know, sort of, how local do they go, or are you finding that they are traveling quite far?
Yeah, great question. Look, we generally don't generally move pallets internationally. They generally stay within an economy, so there might be a national sort of boundary. But what we really want to understand how they move and who's using them, you know, and how they're being used. That's really critical for a circular business, because if you're going to create financial value from leasing your pallets, crates, and containers to customers, you want to make sure it's the customers that are actually using it, not what we call a non-participating, you know, player. But again, looking at the positive side of this ability to track them, we're able to see where a lot of these assets end up, and they're in these non-participating locations, and we're actually able to convert them to be a Brambles customer, to actually enter the circular economy and become part of that process, where they can see the benefit of not owning the pallet, but just using it for what they need it for, and then not having to dispose of the pallet or the container at the end of its life as well. They're just getting the benefit of the service without actually having to own it and dispose of it. And I think that's quite appealing to a lot more organisations as waste costs are going up. And of course, more scrutiny is being put on organisations around, you know, their sustainability commitments.
Great. And I'm just there was a question came in from Raju, just as you asked, was what's the traditional, I think we call it half-life, or what's the different lifespan of a non-reusable pallet? I think was what the question was. Is that, am I asking the right question?
Look, yeah.
Maybe it wasn't in the questions and answers, someone's put it in the chat.
We would say generally that the Brambles assets, a pallet, for example, would last about 10 years, and it's repaired and reconditioned throughout that life cycle quite a number of times. And then when it hits the end of that life cycle, it gets diverted from landfill. So that's critical to our circular story. A linear pallet tends to be very low quality timber, very badly made, and they break very easily. So they end up, unfortunately, in landfill. Even though there are timber recycling options, they're not as widely available. So a lot of them end up in landfill. And one of the biggest issues we have from customers is when they import goods, they're usually on low quality pallets, and they end up having to have one skip bin specifically dedicated to throwing away pallets. So you're probably going to get 1 or 2 max uses out of those sort of linear one-way pallets, and a completely uncertified timber as well. So, you know, I wouldn't go down that path.
Okay, great. So Sabine, you're back. Thank you. I hope
Yes,
you sorted out your IT issues. So
I was just distracted for a moment. Sorry.
No, so I think Stephen was basically giving this concept of a circular economy village. I love this idea of, you know, sort of these local sort of ecosystems, local communities, and all, you know, sort of, you know, behaving in a circular way. And to me, it just resonates what you were saying with regard to the Hydraloop. It was looking about how do we close, you know, that sort of really intimate loop of water usage within a household or within a resident. So it was just sort of, you know, asking you, was that, you know, that's obviously was one of the key, I think, you know, to surmise, one of the key fundamental drivers I'm sure you have. But what other key sort of, you know, sort of visions did, you know, you and your husband have when you started, you know, the company and you set out on this journey back in 2015?
Yes, I'm really sorry. It's very, very late here, so I'm a little.
No.
I'm actually really tired. Well, you know, it's just crazy that, you know, as I was saying before, you know, actually every house has its own, every building has its own water source, and we are wasting so much water, and there is no, you know, there is no infinite supply. So it's actually, it just makes absolute sense to just, you know, be wise and use your water twice. And obviously, you know, there were already some kind of products on the market, but they've never really taken a lift. I think that is also because they're using membranes and filters, and they clog, and, you know, they're not really user friendly. And this is very important, you know, what we need. You know, there is a very small group of people that will, you know, collect their water and, you know, in a bucket when they're showering, and they will water their plants. But this is not how we're going to save our planet. The way that we're going to save our planet is actually by making it very easy. And that's why we really created a consumer product whereby, you know, we really enable people and organizations to save water and energy in a very, very easy fashion.
Right. And I'm conscious, Sabine, it's very, very late in the evening for you, where it's actually probably early morning. So again, thank you so much.
2:15.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. It's just a really quick question. And I think the other questions I think we'll take on notice to have Sabine answer, because I think some of them are very technical. Just one question is actually asking is Hydraloop, has it got the opportunity to expand it for the agricultural sector? So a more high water demand sector, but also with potential opportunities for groundwater recycling?
No, not at this moment. You know, it's I've shown you the, you know, the timeline, but actually there was, before 2015, there is actually it's taken a long longer. I mean, this has started already in 2001, 2002 as a thought, and we've been working on it for a long time. So now it looks nice and easy and simple, and for the consumer it is, but it's actually a very, very high-tech box. So no, so we basically, you know, we can only do this as we are doing it right now. We only make this so basically for the built environment. Yeah.
Great. And I just think as well, I love, you know, the fact that you've put, you know, sort of very much Dutch design, and it's a very attractive, very pretty box, multiple colors available. So I think it would be very attractive to have sitting in your room, become a showcase of if someone came into a new build with it. So congratulations, Sabine. It is a fantastic product.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to shift a little bit back to taxation and to the fiscal measures that we have. And Tiana Nairn has asked a question around, is there a difference in the GST on taxable imports versus domestic products? And maybe this will be relevant to Sabine, as she will be importing her Hydraloop into Australia. Or does this become a uniform price increase irrespective of the environmental and labour standards, or even the environmental and labour, you know, sort of benefits and outcomes it can have? I'm not too sure. Maybe that's one for you, Natalie.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. Well, there taxable importation is happening, but it's at the standard 10%. Where you can make variations, I suppose, is through additional things like the wine equaliser tax, like luxury car taxes, so you can put them on top of the GST, and we could manipulate that situation in those circumstances, or we can actually try and redesign the GST system to take into account that which is going to be a wasteful product, or a product which is, for example, made in the cheaper context and is not part and parcel of the circular economy. So there is opportunities there to make use of the tax system in that respect from the GST perspective, and also adding further penalties. But what I also wanted to mention from before is, if we want to see change, technology is really the way of that. And so we need to think about, how do we encourage that? How do we encourage that that technology? And that's where, you know, the incentive side of things tend to come in. So your tax expenditures come into play in this instance here to encourage that new technology that is going to then help the circular economy along.
Yes, great. And you know, we talked about then this sort of, you know, this absolute shift and focus from being income and labour to be resources and consumption, which again would align to this sort of technology shift, you know, rather than, you know, and again, if we use either Brambles or Hydraloop, you know, both of those are a very good example where, you know, if we're taxing essentially potentially on the wrong basis. And, you know, how, like, can you give me some examples of maybe countries that are looking, or jurisdictions that are starting to embrace that model, where they're looking at it from a more of an income, you know, shifting away from the traditional income and labour, the, you know, PAYG basis to resources and consumption? From your literature review, have we got any examples of where we're seeing it actually happening in reality?
We had a number of examples. I think Stephen wants to say something.
No, I just thought Monique would be the best place to answer that. But
okay, so I think we have examples of sort of increases to resources taxes and consumption taxes, but not so much on the reducing income tax side. So I think it does remain a concept still. There's a lot of the experimentation that's happening is around you know, sort of minor adjustments, I guess, for, you know, the VAT or GST for specific products or activities, such as what's happening in Sweden. Then there's those sort of progressive waste hierarchy linked experiments with waste levy, like adjustments to the waste levy in Korea, and also in Europe as well, in specific countries such as Sweden. So so in terms of that wholesale shift, I don't think we can point to a particular country that's already enacting that so far.
Yeah, I'm thinking as well about in Europe, it's quite common now to tax the emissions from vehicles versus, you know, the size of engine, or and they're absolutely shifting that, and that's obviously driving then, you know, sort of a preference and a huge uptake in electric vehicles because of the emission profiles of those vehicles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can also say, in terms of some of that shift, you can see, for example, the taxes in Victoria on road user charges for electric vehicles as opposed to fuel excise. Is that natural shift? Like, you have to have a tax base somewhere, but you're balancing that against the incentive to encourage the shift to electric vehicles. So there's a real policy tension there for governments. Where does the tax come from, as opposed to what do you incentivize? And maybe there's a transition plan that needs to be put in place to firstly incentivize and then change that tax base to land and assets and usage of assets.
Yeah. Anyone else want to okay. A question that came in via the sort of, it was somebody asked a question around the sort of the, you know, ensuring the quality of the recycled and recycled product, Lachlan, and it kind of relates to me a question I had, which is like, what are you finding is your biggest inhibitor to get access to quality recyclate to include in your product base, and what percentage are you currently at in terms of your particularly your plastic based containers, and what percentage would you aspire to get to in terms of recycled content?
Let's start with that last one first. So Brambles has a commitment to have 30% of their plastic products using recycled or upcycled a material in them by 2025. So at the moment, we reported a full year last year about 16% of all the plastic products. So it's you know, we're in a good place. We've had a 100% post-consumer recycled content palette in the Australian market since 2013. Last year, we also released a wheeled dolly. It's like an in-store product, which was 100% upcycled, low value plastic in the European market, and that's doing particularly well. The challenges, as you just outlined, there are challenges. Getting consistent feedstock of recycled materials is critical. Mixed plastics is more difficult to deal with. And generally, when we're testing a material, we put it through quite an accelerated process in a facility in Orlando, where we essentially simulate a supply chain over a short period of time to determine its ability to actually withstand the impacts of forklifts and racking and all the things that are going to happen to it. And one of the things with recycled content is it can be brittle. And it can fall apart. So we need to be conscious of that. And as I said in the presentation, not undermine the circularity and reusability of that product just because it's got recycled content in it. That said, we're still working with a number of different partners around the world to get this right. One of the other challenges we'd love to solve is food contact products. Now, if we could get some sort of clarity, if you like, on whether or not there's a standard to adhere, and there is one in the US FDA, but essentially there's a prevention in terms of recycled plastic being in a product that comes into direct contact with food. And that would be something we'd love to solve, and it would expand our ability to use recycled content significantly if that was the case.
Okay, so you're saying that one of the barriers to that is actually actually codes and specifications of standards. So at that macro level, I think, Stephen, you talked about these 3 levels and having to work in harmony. And it's so this is a good example where you're looking at developing this at a micro level. You're looking at developing a product or having a service, but if it doesn't work at a macro level in terms of having the codes, legislation and specification, you are, and potentially, within Australia, the infrastructure to be able to process and manufacture those, that plastic to make it available. Because I think we are recognizing this this idea of localization also includes the localization of sovereign solutions and sovereign, capacity and capability to manage, our own resources streams. So so it's a good example of what you're facing, with this. With this food contact packaging that you're looking to do, is that you may have a solution at a micro level, but needing the meso and the macro level to align. I call it just one thing
I'll just quickly add to that, if that's all right. Yeah. In terms of participating in the circular economy and all the people tuning in today, your REDcycle program that's basically available at all the major retailers in terms of taking your soft plastics back to that retailer and getting it collected is a really good success story, and I think it's just had a funding boost by the feds, and that is a really straightforward to recycle product, and there's lots of end uses for that. So that market is really building quite rapidly, and it's fantastic. And there's lots of different applications for that. But in terms of wanting to see the change and participate in that change, then you kind of have to make those changes within your own habits and your own household to actually make sure that you segregate that soft plastic waste and do the right thing with it, so that the success of that particular program can actually expand. And you'll start to see that circularity starts to become much more mainstream when you have lots of participants joining in. Yeah,
and I think what we're starting to see is shifts traditionally, and I've heard it being quoted by behavioural scientists before, that it's an absolute mark of people's commitment to resource recovery and to circular economy when they are willing to collect their soft plastics and bring them back to the supermarket. It's unfortunately, there is a very, very low uptake with regard to, but we are seeing some trials both in New South Wales and in Victoria about curbside soft plastics collection, and I think that could be a massive game changer. But like everything, is we do need the system to support, the collection regime. And what we've had in Australia is that we've had the most fantastic collection system ever. We are the best, collectors of recycling material. Australia led the way. It was the first country in the world to ever lead curbside recycling. Nearly every Australian in the country, regardless of where they live, they have access to curbside recycling. But what happened is that the system unfortunately didn't support all this fantastic recyclate that we were collecting. And now we have realized that, with the export bans and with China sword, is that we've had to localize, our solutions and manage it. And if we don't do it, we are going to end up with a huge issue. So there's a huge burning platform to sort of build more capacity and capability. And on that note, I think, Stephen, I'll hand it back to you, because you talk very eloquently about the need for the system to support sort of this aspiration, and particularly around the need for infrastructure, and what and this sort of you talk very well about what local government can do in terms of land use planning and providing opportunities. But what else could we do? What else could we we're this industry group, one of the reasons we're having this session is to provide opportunities, to bring forward opportunities and suggestions to the different parties that we deal with. So what else are you seeing? What could we lobby for? We have a federal election coming up, for instance. So what should we be saying to the people who are going to knock on our door?
Oh, in terms of lobbying, I think there's definitely that need for harmonisation, not only at the different levels, but across policy, business plans, infrastructure provision. There isn't sort of one thing that I could lobby for. I mean, I could pitch our own proposal of circular economy villages as a planning framework for enabling that transition to a circular economy, and creating a place where you're not talking about a singular stream, but you're talking about how does energy systems integrate with water systems, which can then irrigate food systems, and having food systems close to you reduces the need for transport, reduces the need for packaging, and so you're talking about a whole systems change, and thinking about an economic system, not an individual stream. And I think that's where we get caught up, I think, too much in the circular economy debates around individual streams, individual issues, rather than the connection between them, and recognizing that if you enhance your water systems, you can produce a lot more food locally, and therefore you reduce the need for packaging. Therefore, there's less of a plastic waste problem, but you're starting with a renewable energy system that allows you to circulate water, allows you to create constructed wetlands that sequester carbon and clean that water and irrigate a food system. So thinking in terms of a much more integrated approach, thinking as circularity in terms of a holistic approach, rather than as as I said, about an individual stream of resources that we tend to focus on. And so that would be my pitch, to think much more holistically.
Great. Sabine, and I know it's late for you, but if you could give us one thing the Netherlands has that Australia doesn't have in terms of it being a world leader and recognized global leader in circular economy? What would it be?
Well, I'm very proud to say that, you know, we are based in the north of the Netherlands, and of course it looks like Holland is water abundant, but we actually have a serious water drought in the south and the eastern part of the Netherlands. So it's in the north we have enough water, and in the south we don't, and we are a very small country. But what we do have in the city Leeuwarden, where we are based with our headquarters, is that they have actually now given a subsidy to people for rainwater collection, as well as water recycling, decentral water recycling. And I think if you look at, you know, where we were with solar panels, etc., I think, you know, we are now with water about 10 or 15 years before that moment. And if we really, you know, if we really want to make that change, if we want to meet the global goals, and if we want to have water for future generations, this means, you know, that we really need action, and it means that we need to incentivize people, you know, with subsidies, etc., to really make that transition. So it's not just the few, you know, the early adapters that can afford, you know, to install systems like ours and substantially save water, energy, etc., but to really get the masses to do that as well. So I'm very proud that, you know, we've started now in the Netherlands giving subsidies, and it's substantial. You know, it's €2,000, so it will be about maybe $2,500 Australian dollars.
$3,000 exactly.
There you go.
1.5.
Yeah. So this really helps people, you know, with the investment, and obviously, you know, so this is, I think, a very good example, and we're really hoping that this will set an example to the rest of the world, because this, you know, we really need to do this because, you know, for our planet. So I hope that is a good example of what we're doing here.
Great. And you've got a massive fan in Michael McGallagher, who has said they have moved into going further than closing the loop. They design out ways to, even with large climate adapted infrastructure and nature-based infrastructure initiatives, and the finance and education centre are world class as well. So huge. I think I know where Michael wants to, you know, have his next holiday at least, if not more. So I think I know seriousness. I mean, the Dutch have really led the way.
I think these are things, I'm sorry, Joanne, that, you know, you really have to incentivize the public to really make that big shift, that big move. And we've seen that with solar, as I say, and this is what we really need to do. And we really need to do it fast, because we don't have any time to waste.
Well, that's a perfect segue to Monique and Natalie and Stephen. So from a taxation fiscal measure, what is the one thing the government we could do we've got a federal election, and if we were going to make one ask, what is the one thing that we could really bring in that could really incentivize people and really accelerate our progress?
So I might jump in there. So I think a key thing from my perspective would be removing perverse incentives. So things that encourage kind of wasteful consumption or polluting products and particular industries. So removing those in the first instance. But I also think sort of considering a wide range of policy instruments. So for example, when we're talking about plastics and the spectrum of different plastics that we're collecting, some of those plastics are never going to be viable to recycle, for example, and already are kind of quite polluting. So I think we need to consider things like product design and really focus on designing out that waste and reducing the problem at the start, considering things like product standards as well, in a suite of measures, including things like incentives for businesses. So just keeping that broad perspective on the product life cycle and trying to reduce the problem right at the beginning of life.
Monique? Oh, sorry, Natalie?
What Monique said. But definitely getting rid of perverse incentives. That's a key issue, and then turning on its head and providing incentives for new technologies that are going to come in and help the whole system, and also subsidies for individuals to take up certain practices that are going to be assisting in the circular economy. I think we need to remember the individual in the process, particularly if we're going to create situations which might end up being more costly for, again, those who are in the lower income sphere of our community. So we've got to keep that in mind.
Stephen, anything to add?
Yeah, I would propose or encourage a shift to service-based industries. So we've seen the dramatic savings in the shift to software as a service, for example. The idea of mobility as a service is very much emerging, and another way in which we can reduce, the cars that are, 92% of the time we saw in the video before are not being used. And also housing as a service is the other model that we're talking about, and that's the co-living and build to rent that are emerging in the housing space. And the interesting thing about housing is that it can provide an ecosystem of services within it. So you can manage, provide food, you can manage your white goods, for example, by the service provider, and therefore you get a life cycle management of white goods. So that kind of shift to as a service, everything as a service is important.
And Lachlan, from an industry point of view, what is the biggest change, or if you could give you the magic wand, what would be the one thing you'd see as a big game changer from a commercial point of view?
Well, look, Brambles has been operating in the current environment successfully, but that doesn't mean that we wouldn't want to see change. One of the things that is important is legal title over your assets. So if you have a circular business, you own the asset, and you want to make sure that that legal title is enforceable in that particular jurisdiction. And that's something that we have, some issues in different parts of the world, where possession is actually, 9/10 of the law. So we need to make sure that the recognition of that that circular system, that circular asset, is able to be enforced, and we don't have that problem in Australia so much. But without that, it doesn't give circular businesses the confidence that they're able to get their assets back at the quantities they need to get them back to be a viable business.
Yeah, okay. Excellent. Australia is always, in complete contrast to the Netherlands, which is, sort of one of the smaller countries of Europe with a very, very large population. I think it's probably one of the most dense countries in Europe. Australia is absolutely the opposite. We are very, very sporadically populated around some sort of key cities, but very, very low densities, and a real issue around tyranny of distance is one of the things we're always challenged about. So, what do you think we can do from an industry point of view to really try and overcome that, given that we do need sovereign solutions to deal with our resources? The ability to just export the problem, is essentially dramatically reduced or and removed. And I think it's not just the export bans, but we are seeing COVID has highlighted this, and even what's going on dreadfully in Ukraine. What we're seeing is the need for more sovereign responsibility for our own outcomes and for our own production and manufacturing, etc. So we obviously, Australia has a very, we've always had a lot of incentives in terms of, grants and different things like that to promote, different opportunities here. But what else can be done to really support sovereign-based production and processing capability and the systems associated that we need to deliver locally?
I'd like to comment on that. I think it's important, and this is one of the issues that we highlight in the report, that we have to distinguish the Australian situation from Europe because of, two different factors. Firstly, that idea of the tyranny of distance, how far we are from a lot of markets, but also how large the distances are within Australia. And so we have to focus much more on the distribution costs as opposed to the production costs of anything. And that's why, once again, the idea of localizing production as much as possible, even within Australia is much more important. The other important distinction between Australia and Europe is that we're a resource exporter. So that's what we, how we see ourselves in the global economic system. We're not a manufacturing country, certainly not to the extent of Europe and China, for example. So the shift to a circular economy has much different impacts on Australia because we're so dependent on resource exports. So I think one of the issues is that as other countries shift to a circular economy, their dependence on our resources will reduce. So it's a real risk for Australia if we don't shift to a circular economy because because of that dependence on resource exports. So there's those two ways of thinking of the Australian economy is fundamentally different from smaller European nations that we need to be mindful of when talking about the circular economy transition in Australia as distinct from, or as it will play out differently here than in other countries.
So Lachlan, on what from a practical basis, you are in market, you distribute your products and you across Australia and wider. So how do you manage that whole tyranny distance? And now that you're looking to track what you have, and potentially it's far more far-flung than potentially you thought it might be. So how do you, on a practical sense, manage it as a company?
Yeah, look, just very quickly on the tracking piece, it's very early stages there. So we haven't done a lot of that in Australia, but that is happening overseas in UK and Ireland and in Canada. But the reverse logistics, and there was a question about this as well, is fundamental to a circular system because, again, you've got to collect your assets. The way the Brambles business is structured is it generally capitalises on empty lanes in the transportation network to actually collect the assets. Generally, those trucks are travelling empty, so there's an opportunity to capitalise on an empty lane. It's cheaper for the business to do that because there was nothing in it previously, and of course you're capitalising on fuel that's being burnt to move that truck back to a particular location. And generally, the distances between where it lands at CHEP at a service centre versus where it was going are not that different because CHEP locates itself in amongst where all the DCs are. In most of the capital cities. So logistics and the tyranny of distance is not isolated to Australia at all. I mean, our biggest part of the business is in the US and Canada, and they have very, very long distances that they're moving as well, where generally you have a food production part of the country that moves that food to market, and then you have an excess of pallets in terms of the pool is at the other end of the market. You need to get that back over to the food production side of the business. And for Australia, it's actually up north where the food is produced, and bringing that back down and then getting the pallets back up there. So that tyranny of distance is something that we've been able to build into the decision-making processes of the business from very early stages, simply because we're a circular model. You cannot think about that. You need to get your product back. It's essential to your strategy. So you need to capitalise on the systems and the infrastructure that's available to do that. So that is, and then any other business that's going to be circular has to think about how they're going to do that. And I think some of the examples that are highlighted in a particular publication that the Australian Packaging Covenant organisation released about 3 or 4 weeks ago, specifically on reuse, some of those B2C, so those business to consumer solutions in terms of how a consumer participates in, say, home care products, washing products, and how they can use those and return those back to the producer or the manufacturer through the post. All right, so they're going to capitalise on the tyranny of distance via post. But for us, it's a much bigger scale, and we're generally sort of trying to find empty trucks around different parts of the market. And one of the things that we've seen in terms of a trend in the growth of e-commerce is much more logistics movements as well. If you look at the sector in terms of decarbonisation out to 2030, despite there's a lot of technology that's probably going to hit the logistics sector late in the decade to reduce emissions or eliminate emissions, the growth in movements actually makes that slack. So there's a lot of opportunity within the logistics networks to capitalise on empty lanes and empty space And that's something that Brambles tries to do, not just for ourselves, but we also connect our customers and other players in the market, because we have this visibility of entire supply chains and we know where the empty lanes are. So that collaboration in transport is going to be really critical to actually achieving emissions reductions in the transport sector going forward as well, and dealing with the tyranny of distance.
So you obviously have great understanding of this sort of idea, this empty lanes and how the logistics work. But do you think, like, is there anything that could be done, for instance, at a procurement stage to enable more transparency and more opportunity for sort of essentially, you know, wasted airspace or wasted carbon that's going to be moving anyway? We see this. I mean, the example I've always sort of had quoted at me is mining tires. So mining tires go up to the mine, they're transported up to the mine, but they can never get them back off the mine, because the fact that there wasn't considered, you know, when they procured the tire to go up, no one thought about the idea of the tire coming back off, and there wasn't the value to justify the expense and the fuel to go back to the mine to collect it. So, but if they thought about it at the beginning, then they would have, you know, they could have enabled the empty truck to carry the mining, you know, the mining tire back down again, which obviously has, you know, potentially has a value, but not as much of a value as the new tire cost going up. So do you think is there any quick wins that can happen, you know, from procurement? The New South Wales, you know, waste and resource recovery strategy talks about procurement and the opportunities that procurement can to support a circular economy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the example you've just cited is a perfect case study in linear versus circular thinking. It happens all the time. The transport industry as a whole is, generally you have, and this is a big generalization, but you have a lot of big players, well-known brands who move things, and they're the big players. But then you have a very big middle, which is very small operations, low margin. They are literally cutting it all the time. And as you've seen recently, with the fuel increases, a lot of these businesses are operating at a loss at the moment. So there is a big opportunity for government to play a role here in terms of collaborating with different industry players, bringing that sector together and actually understanding how that network operates now and how it can operate much more efficiently going forward with everyone's climate commitments in mind. There's a huge amount of empty space moving around the country. So, as a quick win, the example you cited, there's probably many opportunities where that could actually, be put on an empty truck and brought back somewhere for recycling and reconditioning or that kind of thing. So there's just not the coordination to do it. And that's one of the roles that Brambles plays, given we sort of deal with all the logistics providers in the markets in which we operate. We're not gaining any commercial benefit a lot of the time from this, but we're saying there's an empty lane, use that, rather than paying the spot price for you to get your products back or to move it from A to B. And that's something that we see ourselves playing that role going forward as a sort of an independent arbiter of empty lanes and empty space in the transport sector, far more developed in Europe than it is in the other markets in which we operate. I'd say that is part of our decarbonisation strategy as an organisation, and we're going to be trying to help customers and other players decarbonise their transport supply chains by sharing that knowledge.
Great. I'm going to look to probably starting to wrap up. And before I do, I would just like to thank everyone again, all our panelists, but in particular on World Water Day, I would like to thank Sabine for staying up to this extremely late hour and just telling us about, Hyderloop. I'm so excited about it. I'm going to go off and see what the situation is for my own house. And you've definitely, I was built on the wall. I think I'm now going to, Powerwall and a Hyderloop is definitely will be on my radar. But also, and I hope you have a good night's sleep, Sabine, after this, but also thank you to Lachlan. What Brambles are doing is you are world leading and you are an exemplar company in the Australian environment. So congratulations to you. And I look forward to seeing your ambition, as you go forward and keep pushing that as far as you are. Definitely, you are more than able to do. And to Monique and Stephen and Natalie, thank you so much for the rapid review. It was a pleasure to work with you through the process, and I know the rapid reviews are going to be all made, the reports are all going to be made available after this session, and I'm sure everyone will really enjoy deep diving into it. What, you know, some of the research and the findings you came out are extremely valuable, and I think, you know, don't be afraid to bring these forward when you do have politicians knocking on your door over the next couple of months. So Lisa, handing back over to you, and thank you very much for a great session.
Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Joyanne, for hosting that session for us. Well, that brings us to the end of day 2 and the end of our forum. Over the past 2 days, it's been a delight to showcase New South Wales circular research with our industry partners and our researchers, as you've just been listening, to hear from national and international experts like Sabine and others across industry and government. Congratulations to our rapid review researchers who you've been listening to today and yesterday on precincts and infrastructure and carbon measurement in the circular economy policy, and of course taxation just now. We're also really proud to have had the New South Wales Minister for Science, the new Minister for Science, Innovation and Technology, the Honourable Alastair Henskens, announcing our 400,000K circular challenge funding and opening our conference yesterday for amazing circular economy solutions that are focusing on local hospital plastics recycling and converting organic waste to bricks. Well done to those researchers, and importantly to the companies that are demonstrating their CE commitment and leadership, in this case by matching our funding to those projects to change their business models to become more circular, which is what we've just been discussing. So I'd encourage you to also look at where you can integrate research to remove those sorts of barriers in your organisation to make your products and services and operations more circular. A big thank you also to the new Minister for the Environment in New South Wales, the Honourable James Griffin, highlighting the environmental disaster of plastics and the growth of that waste, and also demonstrating his own personal commitment to circular economy in New South Wales, which has been warmly welcomed. And we also heard from ministers, from states and territories and local governments and investors about how important it is for us to work across the entire Australian economy. No one organisation can do this on their own. And some terrific insights from our international speakers, São Paulo and Tesla, on their strategic commitments, as we mentioned before, on to the circular economy with the world's biggest circular economy fund. And now Sabine with Hydraloop in the Netherlands. Not only did they innovate a solution to recycling in their own garage out of frustration about how much water we waste, and I'm sure many of you would share this frustration, but they've also very importantly managed to navigate the regulations in New South Wales, Australia, which prohibited these types of innovations from being connected in the home. So removing a big barrier, and through their partnership with Sydney Water, this leading work, they've actually removed a barrier, not just for themselves, but setting up a precedent for the entire market to start taking steps closer and closer to more circular solutions at the home and precinct scale. So at that point, I'm going to pause. I'm going to say to you all that this leaves us with a big challenge. What will each of us do tomorrow? What will each of us do next month and the rest of this year to move our businesses and our organisations, our products, services from linear to circular ones? I'm going to leave that question with you, and I'm going to wrap up our forum today. All our research, as Joyanne and others have said, the newly announced challenge funding recipients, our speeches will all be available on our website, and you'll also be sent links to that. We'll get to your questions, we'll take them on notice and hopefully answer them and come back to you if we didn't get to them already. Thank you so much to our partners, our funders, speakers, to the phenomenal team and board at New South Wales Circular, and to each of every one of you for participating in this critical discussion today and yesterday. Please don't stop here. Join our efforts, keep moving your organisation forward towards a circular economy. There's so much to be done. We've all got a role to play. Stay safe and stay circular.